Adrian stared at his phone long after the call ended, the silence of his office thick around him. For years, he had thought he knew Isabella better than anyone else in the world, but the woman who had shared his bed, his holidays, and his secrets had become a stranger overnight. 15 years reduced to legal jargon and cold instructions. The memory of her last smile flickered in his mind. The way she had leaned over the counter 2 nights ago to ask if he wanted red or white wine with dinner. Nothing had given her away. Nothing. He had expected tears, maybe even anger, but not this. Not silence wrapped in legal threats. And yet, here he was, reply with his own silence, with his own withdrawal. She had made her choice. All he had done was follow her rules. That night, he walked through the house again, noticing more of the little absences. The blue sweater she always left draped on the sofa was gone. The small framed photo of her and her mother from years ago was missing from the hallway table. She had taken pieces of herself, but left behind a ghost of their life together. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they had laughed countless times, where they had planned trips, argued over bills, and even cried together. Now, it was just wood and silence. The weekend crept in heavy and long. Adrian filled it with errands, the gym, even meaningless television. Anything to keep his mind from circling back to the text. Every time his phone buzzed, he half expected Isabella to break her own rule and message him again, but she didn't. Instead, on Sunday evening, he received an email from Ms. Carter, his newly retained lawyer. She confirmed that Mr. Lawson had already filed an emergency motion for temporary spousal support. Isabella wasn't wasting any time. By Monday morning, Adrian had settled into an eerie routine. Work, meals, sleep. His mind was oddly clear, even detached, as though someone else were steering his body, while his real self watched in the corner of the room. Then came the first crack in that calm facade. Around 8 in the evening, his phone rang. The caller ID flashed a familiar name, Natalie, Isabella's best friend. He considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. He pressed accept. Adrian. Natalie's voice was sharp, almost accusatory. Yes. What the hell is wrong with you? He pinched the bridge of his nose. Hello to you too, Natalie. Don't play with me. Isabella is on my couch right now, crying her eyes out because you cut her off. She couldn't even buy groceries. Do you know how humiliating that is for her? Adrian's jaw tightened. She sent me a message asking for a divorce, and she insisted that all communication go through her lawyer. I respected her wishes. Everything financial will now be handled through the legal process, she demanded. That's cruel, Natalie snapped. You know she barely works. Her part-time design jobs don't even cover her rent. You left her with nothing. He inhaled slowly, choosing his word with care. Natalie, she ended our marriage with a text. She set the terms. If she wants support, she can request it legally. I will not break the rules she created just because she didn't think through the consequences. She made a mistake. Natalie shot back. She was emotional. 15 years, Adrian. Don't you think she deserves better than this? Better than honesty? His voice sharpened. She drew the lines. She gets to live with them. You don't get to lecture me about responsibility when your friend is the one who detonated everything with a single message. There was a silence on the other end. Then Natalie's voice dropped, venomous. She'll take you for everything. Mark my words. She can try, Adrian said calmly, and hung up before she could say more. His hand trembled slightly as he set the phone down, but not from fear. From anger. It wasn't enough that Isabella had blindsided him. Now she was spinning a story where she was a helpless victim, abandoned and destitute. The truth was more complicated, but truth rarely mattered when emotions ran high. The very next day, Adrian's bank sent him an alert. An unusual withdrawal attempt had been flagged from an old joint account he had nearly forgotten existed. His stomach dropped. The account was ancient, barely touched for years, holding just a few $100s left to gather dust. And yet, someone had tried to drain it entirely in one move. He didn't need to ask who. At the bank, the clerk explained that the attempt had triggered a fraud alert because of a sudden, suspicious activity. Adrian explained the pending divorce, showed the original message Isabella had sent, and asked for the account to be frozen until legal proceedings determined ownership. It wasn't about the money, it was the principle. She had insisted on lawyers. Yet here she was, trying to slip through back channels. That night, Adrian lay awake in the silence of his too-big house, staring at the ceiling. The betrayal no longer hurt in the same raw way it had on Tuesday. Now, it burned in a colder, sharper way. She wasn't just ending the marriage. She was trying to rewrite the story, painting herself as the abandoned wife and him as the cold-hearted villain. But he knew the truth, and he was ready to fight. A week had passed since Isabella's text detonated their marriage. Adrian moved through his days with mechanical precision. Wake, work, eat, sleep, while around the war quietly escalated. Ms. Carter had assured him his first moves were sound. The canceled cards, the allowance stopped, the frozen account. She set the tone. His lawyer had said, her voice calm, deliberate. You simply followed. But Isabella's camp wasn't going to let the silence last. On Monday, Mr. Lawson filed a formal request demanding emergency temporary support, claiming Isabella had been left destitute by Adrian's sudden and malicious financial abandonment. The irony made Adrian laugh when Ms. Carter read it aloud. The woman who had left their home voluntarily, who had sent a 3-sentence text ending 15 years, was now insisting she had been blindsided and abandoned. She wants exclusive use of the marital home, too. Ms. Carter added dryly. Adrian blinked. She left. She's not even here. Which makes the request easy to counter, his lawyer said. But prepare yourself. This is the opening salvo. They'll go for the emotional angle. Helpless wife, heartless husband. Don't engage directly. Let me do the talking. So Adrian sat back and watched as the narrative shifted around him. By Wednesday evening, the first call came. It was Natalie again. Against his better judgment, Adrian answered. Do you have any idea what you've done to her? She hissed. She's on my couch, Adrian. She can't even sleep. She's terrified of the future. You've ruined her. He rubbed his temples. Natalie, we've had this conversation. Everything goes through lawyers. She's not eating properly. She's depressed. She's scared you'll throw her to the streets. Adrian's voice hardened. She's the one who chose to end our marriage in the most hostile way possible. She shut down communication. I respected her rules. If she wants money, she'll get it through the courts. You bastard, Natalie spat. You always took care of her. Now you're just abandoning her because your pride is hurt. My pride. His laugh was bitter. No, Natalie. I'm simply refusing to play both roles, her ex-husband and her personal bank. If she wanted an amicable discussion, she should have had one. Instead, she hired a lawyer before she even spoke to me. There was silence for a moment. Then Natalie said, she'll bleed you dry. Just wait. Adrian ended the call without replying. The very next day, the pressure shifted. Isabella's mother, Mrs. Donovan, called him in tears. Adrian, how could you do this to her? She's my daughter. She's frightened. She's lost everything, and you're cutting her off like she's trash. After all the years she gave you. He closed his eyes, holding the phone tightly. Mrs. Donovan, I understand you love your daughter, but she chose this path. She wanted lawyers only. That means finances go through lawyers only. I'm not heartless. I'm following the rules she made. She regrets it, her mother cried. She wasn't thinking clearly. 15 years, Adrian. Don't you care at all? He swallowed the anger rising in his throat. Of course I care. But caring doesn't mean I let her dictate my life while ignoring her own choices. The courts will decide what's fair. You're cruel, Mrs. Donovan whispered. Cruel and cold. Goodbye, Adrian said quietly and hung up. That night, he sat in the living room with the lights off, the house quiet around him. They had mobilized quickly, Natalie, her mother, even her lawyer, all painting him as a villain. He wasn't surprised, but the relentlessness of it weighed on him. And then came the bank notification. Someone had tried again to access the frozen joint account. Adrian stared at the message on his phone, a cold smile forming. Isabella's desperation was showing, and it would only strengthen his case. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. Adrian knew it would be his first real glimpse of her since the text. He wondered if she would look at him, or she'd keep her eyes lowered, pretending the man she'd lived with for 15 years was nothing more than a stranger sitting across a courtroom. Either way, he would be ready. If she wanted an amicable discussion, she should have had one. Instead, she hired a lawyer before she even spoke to me. There was silence for a moment. Then Natalie said, "She'll bleed you dry. Just wait." Adrian ended the call without replying. The very next day, the pressure shifted. Isabella's mother, Mrs. Donovan, called him in tears. "Adrian, how could you do this to her? She's my daughter. She's frightened. She's lost everything, and you're cutting her off like she's trash. After all the years she gave you." He closed his eyes, holding the phone tightly. "Mrs. Donovan, I understand you love your daughter, but she chose this path. She wanted lawyers only. That means finances go through lawyers only. I'm not heartless. I'm following the rules she made. She regrets it," her mother cried. She wasn't thinking clearly. 15 years, Adrian. Don't you care at all? He swallowed the anger rising in his throat. "Of course I care. But caring doesn't mean I let her dictate my life while ignoring her own choices. The courts will decide what's fair." "You're cruel," Mrs. Donovan whispered. "Cruel and cold." "Goodbye," Adrian said quietly and hung up. That night, he sat in the living room with the lights off, the house quiet around him. They had mobilized quickly. Natalie, her mother, even her lawyer, all painting him as a villain. He wasn't surprised, but the relentlessness of it weighed on him. And then came the bank notification. Someone had tried again to access the frozen joint account. Adrian stared at the message on his phone, a cold smile forming. Isabella's desperation was showing, and it would only strengthen his case. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. Adrian knew it would be his first real glimpse of her since the text. He wondered if she would look at him, or she'd keep her eyes lowered, pretending the man she'd lived with for 15 years was nothing more than a stranger sitting across a courtroom. Either way, he would be ready. Adrian's days no longer belonged to him. They belonged to the war Isabella had declared. What had started with a cold text had unraveled into a battlefield stretching across courtrooms. Phone calls, whispered rumors, and sleepless nights. He had thought he knew his wife. For 12 years, they had shared a home, a bed, plans of future. But the woman he faced now felt like a stranger who wore Isabella's face, but moved with venom instead of love. It began with whispers. One Wednesday morning, Adrian walked into his office to find his assistant, Clara, looking uneasy. Just a heads up," she said carefully. "HR asked to see you." His stomach clenched. In a glass-walled room, his boss and the HR director sat waiting with measured expressions. The director cleared her throat. "Adrian, we received an anonymous complaint. Allegations of instability, that you've been using company resources for personal legal battles. And," she glanced at her notes, "that you've been harassing your estranged wife." For a moment, Adrian just stared. The audacity left him breathless. He forced himself to sit, spine straight. "I'll be clear. Those claims are false. I have conducted all communications with my attorney from personal devices. And as for harassment, my wife demanded all contact go through lawyers. I've respected that." His boss, a man who had known him for years, gave a small nod. "We reviewed the logs. Nothing unusual. Honestly, I figured this was noise. But HR has to check the box." Adrian's jaw tightened. So she or someone close to her tried to sabotage my career. The HR director's lips pressed in. "It's anonymous, but the timing suspicious." They dismissed him with polite assurances. But when Adrian stepped back into the corridor, shame burned his skin. Anonymous complaints didn't vanish. They lingered in files, shadows that could be twisted later. Isabella was trying to make him radioactive. That evening, Miss Carter listened patiently as he vented. "They're going after my reputation now. If HR hadn't known me, if I worked somewhere less supportive, this could have ruined me." She was calm, as always. "That's precisely the tactic. They want to destabilize you. Document everything. If we build a pattern of harassment, it will help in court. Adrian hung up the phone and sat in the dark for a long time. He wasn't just fighting for money or assets. He was fighting for his identity, his livelihood, his name. The next blow didn't come from Isabella. It came from his own family. On Sunday afternoon, his sister Emily called, her voice tight. "Adrian, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest." "What is it?" Did you ever get physical with Isabella?" The words punched him in the chest. "What? No, absolutely not. She told Mom you shoved her during an argument, that she left because she felt unsafe." His vision blurred with rage. "That's a lie. Emily, I swear on my life, I never laid a hand on her. Not once." "I believe you," Emily said quickly, but her voice wavered. "It's just, Isabella sounded so convincing. She was crying. Mom's shaken. She doesn't know what to think." Adrian hung up feeling hollow. It wasn't just whispers in the workplace anymore. Isabella was poisoning his family, rewriting history with crocodile tears and trembling voices. That night, he pulled out old journals, receipts, emails, anything that might counter future lies. He built a timeline, evidence of where he was on certain dates, records of conversations. If Isabella tried to spin abuse allegations into formal claims, he would be ready. But preparation didn't ease the ache. He stared at the empty side of his bed, wondering how the woman who had once sworn to love him could now accuse him of violence. The following week brought another storm. His phone buzzed at midnight. Unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Adrian." Isabella's voice soft, almost childlike. His chest tightened. "What do you want? Why are you doing this to me?" He let out a harsh laugh. "Doing what? You're the one who ended things. You demanded lawyers only, and now you're spreading lies." "I just want to be free," she whispered. "But you're making me look like a monster." "You don't need my help for that," he shot back. A sharp inhale. Then her voice broke into venom. "You'll regret this. I swear you'll regret it." The line went dead. Adrian stood frozen in his kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. For a moment, pity flickered. Then it vanished under the weight of her threat. He forwarded the call log to Ms. Carter with a single note. She broke her own rule. Save this. The next day, another blow arrived in his mailbox. No return address, just a plain envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Words cut from magazines and glued in uneven lines. "Your career is next. You will lose everything." He barked a bitter laugh. Childish, almost cartoonish. But his fingers still trembled as he held it. He set it aside carefully, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and filed it with the rest of the evidence. Every piece mattered. And slowly, a realization hardened in him. Up until now, he had been playing defense, fending off attacks, patching wounds, trying to survive. But defense alone was bleeding him dry. He needed to fight back. At their next meeting, Adrian leaned across Ms. Carter's desk, voice low. "I don't just want to defend myself anymore. I want to go on the offensive. The house, the car, her spending records. If she wants war, let's give her one she can't win." For the first time, Miss Carter allowed a faint smile. "Then we dig. Discovery works both ways. If she's hiding assets, if she's exaggerating expenses, if she's misrepresenting income, we'll find it. And when we do, she'll be the one cornered." Adrian left her office with something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose. He began living differently. His mornings weren't just rituals. They were training. He ran longer, lifted heavier, poured anger into sweat. His apartment became both fortress and war room. Every folder, every document, every screenshot was ammunition. And slowly, his fear began to fade. When Natalie called again, her voice sharp with accusation. "She's on my couch, Adrian. You cut her off. She can't even buy groceries." He didn't flinch. "She demanded lawyers only," he said evenly. "I complied. If she needs support, she can request it through her attorney." "You know the rules," she said. "You're cruel, heartless." "No, Natalie. I'm following instructions." If she doesn't like the consequences, that's her problem. He hung up before she could answer, and this time he didn't feel guilt. The tide was shifting. But Isabella had one last card to play. 3 weeks later, in the emergency support hearing, she arrived looking fragile, dressed in muted colors, eyes downcast. She avoided Adrian's gaze, but he could feel the performance radiating off her. Mr. Gray stood tall, voice dripping indignation. My client has been cut off without warning. She is destitute. She cannot pay for food, housing, or transportation. Mr. Blake acted in bad faith, stripping her of all resources. Adrian sat still, jaw tight, as Miss Carter rose smoothly. Your Honor, let's review the facts. Mrs. Blake demanded all communication go through counsel. Mr. Blake complied immediately, ceasing informal financial arrangements. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, all paid by my client. What was ended were discretionary transfers, never legally mandated. Furthermore, she slid a document across the table. Mrs. Blake attempted to withdraw funds from a dormant joint account after instructing no direct contact. That demonstrates an intent to sidestep her own rules. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Isabella kept her eyes fixed on the floor. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Blake, why was there no prior discussion before requesting divorce through counsel only? Isabella's lips trembled. I was intimidated. Adrian almost laughed. Him? Intimidating? The judge's skeptical expression said enough. In the end, temporary support was ordered, but far below Isabella's demands. Enough for necessities, nothing more. The judge's words were clear. Your own choices have contributed to your situation, Mrs. Blake. For Adrian, it felt like air filling his lungs after weeks underwater. Not a total victory, but proof that truth still mattered. Yet as he walked out of the courthouse, he knew this was only one battle. Isabella would not stop, and neither would he, because this was no longer about surviving. It was about winning. Adrian thought the worst was behind him after the emergency support hearing. But as weeks stretched into months, he realized Isabella had only been warming up. The hearings turned into trench warfare. Endless motions, counter-motions, letters filled with accusations and rebuttals. Isabella's lawyer, Mr. Gray, filed requests as though his pen were a machine gun, spraying paper bullets designed to overwhelm. Exclusive use of the house. Demands for spousal support far above her needs. Legal fees, lifestyle stipends, even reimbursement for emotional damages. Adrian stopped flinching. Each time a new demand landed on Ms. Carter's desk, he barely blinked. Filed a response, he'd say, his voice flat, and Ms. Carter did with surgical precision. Every demand countered, every exaggeration cut down with receipts and records. But the stress was constant. At work, whispers still followed him. Colleagues wondering if the rumors were true. In the grocery store, he caught neighbors glancing at him with pity or suspicion. The story Isabella spun about the cruel husband who had abandoned her had spread. He learned to live with it. Truth was quieter than gossip, but truth had teeth, and in court, truth mattered more than sympathy. One rainy Thursday, Miss Carter called him into her office. Piles of documents covered her desk, all stamped with the mark of discovery. We finally received Isabella's full disclosures, she said, and I think you'll want to see this. She handed him a folder. Inside were bank statements, accounts Adrian hadn't known existed, transfers from her parents, deposits from freelance work, even an investment account tied to inherited stocks. Individually, none were massive, but together, they painted a very different picture from the one she presented in court. She's not destitute, Adrian muttered. She's been hiding assets. Exactly. And here's the kicker. Ms. Carter tapped a highlighted section. Several deposits traced back to joint funds before separation. She's commingled assets she claimed were separate. That makes them fair game. Adrian felt a grim satisfaction rise his chest. For months, she had painted him as a villain while draining accounts in secret. Now, the mask was slipping. When the next hearing arrived, Ms. Carter dropped the evidence like a stone into still water. Your Honor, she said crisply, my client had been portrayed as cutting off Mrs. Blake. leaving her helpless. But these documents tell a different story. Accounts undisclosed until forced by discovery. Income misrepresented. Assets hidden. Not only does this contradict the narrative of helplessness, it raises questions about credibility in all prior claims. Mr. Gray scrambled. Separate property. Family contributions. Irrelevant to marital division. Not when commingled with marital funds. Ms. Carter interrupted smoothly. And not when used to inflate expenses while demanding extraordinary support. The judge leaned back, unimpressed. Mrs. Blake, why were these accounts not disclosed initially? Isabella's cheeks flushed. I didn't think they were relevant. Adrian watched her squirm, her carefully crafted fragility cracking under the weight of evidence. For the first time, she looked small, not delicate, not tragic, just small. The judge's tone hardened. Failure to disclose assets is serious. This court will not tolerate misrepresentation. From that day, momentum shifted. The car battle came next. Isabella clung to it like a lifeline, insisting it was essential. But when pressed, she couldn't qualify to take over the lease. Adrian had warned her, repeatedly, that payments would stop. She ignored him. A month later, the leasing company repossessed the car from Natalie's driveway. The call started immediately. Furious, panicked, desperate. You bastard. Isabella screamed down the line. How could you let them take my car? How am I supposed to get to work? Adrian stayed calm. You're supposed to handle it with your lawyer. That's what you wanted, remember? You'll regret this. He hung up, forwarded the voicemail to Miss Carter, and went back to his dinner. The house was next. It had been the center of their life together. Dinners at the long oak table, arguments in the kitchen, laughter in the living room. But now it was nothing more than a chess piece. Isabella had left months ago, yet her lawyer fought tooth and nail for her to reclaim it. Adrian moved fast. He filed for exclusive use, citing her abandonment. The judge agreed. Soon, the house was appraised, prepped for sale. Isabella dragged her heels, filing delays, arguing valuations. But the market didn't care about her stall tactics. The house sold within weeks, the equity locked into escrow. Another piece off the board. Through it all, Adrian felt himself changing. The man who had once stared in shock at divorce text was gone. In his place stood someone harder, sharper. He had learned to separate noise from substance, manipulation from fact. Late one night, staring at the ceiling, he realized he no longer hated Isabella. Hatred required too much energy. What he felt was colder, indifference. She could scheme. She could lie. She could paint herself as a victim to anyone who would listen. But none of it mattered anymore. He was untouchable where it counted. In court, in truth, in the fortress he had built around himself. The final stretch came 6 months in, as the trial date loomed. Ms. Carter laid out their strategy. The judge is growing impatient. Mr. Gray's stalling tactics have backfired. We press for settlement. If she refuses, we go to trial. But I'll tell you, she won't risk it. Not after being caught hiding assets. She was right. In the tense air of pretrial negotiations, Isabella's mask cracked completely. She wanted more, always more. But each time she pushed, the judge reminded her the risks. At one point, Mr. Gray leaned in close to her, whispering urgently. Adrian caught only fragments. Fees, worse outcome, no choice. And finally, she broke. The settlement was signed 2 weeks later. Adrian walked out of the courthouse into bright sunlight, papers in hand. Assets nearly split down the middle, but with adjustments in his favor for her hidden accounts. Stocks divided. Spousal support limited. 2 years, rehabilitative only, far below her original demands. No lifestyle stipends. No endless alimony. Each paid their own legal fees. It wasn't the crushing victory of movies or novels, but it was fair, more than fair, and most importantly, it was over. The aftermath unfolded quietly. Isabella moved into a modest apartment. Complaints about money drifting through the grapevine. Natalie's loyalty frayed, burdened by the constant drama. Even Isabella's parents began pulling back, weary of funding her battles. Adrian didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled, the weight of months of war lifting from his chest. Life returned in fragments. Early mornings at the gym, where sweat burned away the residue of rage. Dinners with friends Isabella had driven off years ago. Long walks in the evening silence of a neighborhood no longer tainted by her shadow. One Friday, Emily invited him over for dinner. His niece, only 6, climbed into his lap with a giggle. "Uncle Adrian, Mommy says you're strong." He smiled, eyes stinging. Strong. It wasn't how he felt. But maybe strength wasn't about feeling. It was about surviving, adapting, enduring. As he drove home that night, windows down, cool air rushing in, he thought of Isabella, the woman he had once loved, the woman who had burned everything with a single text. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel regret. He felt nothing at all. And that, he realized, was freedom. The war was over. The scars would remain, yes, but scars were proof of survival, proof that he had walked through fire and emerged whole. No Hollywood ending, no dramatic revenge, just the quiet satisfaction of living, of reclaiming himself piece by piece. For Adrian Blake, that was victory enough. And with that, our story comes to an end, but the real story begins with your thoughts. What would you do if you were in this situation? Let me know in the comments.